Morning is read from the Bible from John chapter 21. I'd like to read verses 15 through 19. Let us listen to the words of John. When they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Jesus asked a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Take care of my sheep." He asked a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was sad that Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" He replied, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. I assure you that when you were younger, you tied your own belt and walked around wherever you wanted. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will tie your belt and lead you where you don't want to go." He said this to show the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After saying this, Jesus said to Peter, "Follow me." Now, this reading today is part of a larger story. In the Gospel of John, the writer tells us that this story is the third post-resurrection appearance of Jesus to some of his disciples. So let me kind of tell you the broader story that brings us down to our reading today. If you go back to the beginning of the chapter, we are told that Peter, James, John, Thomas, and actually a total of 7 disciples were just kind of hanging out together. And Peter said to them, he said, "I'm going to go fishing." And they said, "Well, we'll go fishing with you." So they got into a boat, and they went out onto a large lake. They spent the entire night fishing and didn't catch a bite. They were coming in the next morning, approaching the beach, and there was a man on the beach, but they didn't recognize who it was. And the man on the beach shouted out to them and said, "Hey, did you catch anything last night?" And they responded, "Not a bite." And the man on the beach said, "Well, if you'll take the net and throw it off on the right side of your boat, I have a feeling you might catch something." And they did. And they caught so many fish, it filled the net, and they had trouble bringing the net in. At that, John said to Peter, "Hey, that's the Lord." And Peter was so excited at that he jumped out of the boat into the water and swam to shore. And then the other disciples brought the boat full of fish to the shore. When they got up there to Jesus, Jesus had fixed breakfast for them. He had cooked out some fish on the beach and had some bread. And he said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you caught." And he served breakfast to these disciples. And that brings us down to the reading that I shared with you in verses 15 through 19. We have a conversation between Jesus and Peter. And this conversation is often referred to from Bible teachers and pastors as Peter's reinstatement. Now, why is this called Peter's reinstatement? Well, Bible students like to connect this story with another story in the gospel. And the other story is the story of Jesus shortly before he was arrested, when he said to his disciples, "All of you are going to forsake me and run away." And when Jesus said that, Peter took issue with him. He said, "That's not going to happen." He goes, "Now all these people may desert you and go away, but hey, you can count on me. I'll be with you no matter what." And Jesus said to Peter, he said, "Now Peter, I want to tell you something. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said, "Ain't going to happen." But it happened. And when Peter denied Jesus 3 times and the rooster crowed, He was a broken man. The Bible says that he went out and wept bitterly. Probably one of the lowest points of Peter's life, as he realized that he had denied his Lord and his best friend. And so Bible students like to take these two stories and kind of put them together. And the way they look at it is this. We have Peter denying Jesus 3 times. 1, 2, 3. In this story today, we have Jesus asking Peter 3 times, do you love me? 1, 2, 3. And Peter answers him 3 times, yes, I love you. 1, 2, 3. And so when we put the two together, we say, well, it's kind of a balancing out of the scales, so to speak. The 3 denials, 3 times he's asked, do you love me? 3 times he says, yes, yes, I do love you. So that's why it is called Peter's reinstatement. Now, I do think there's a connection between the two stories. But the fact of the matter, the connection is deeper than the way I've just related to you. The way I have just told you the comparison between the two stories is to look at this story in the English, because that's just exactly how it looks. But when you look at this story in the language in which the New Testament was written, there is something else going on here. And what's going on is that in the Greek language of the New Testament, Jesus is using one word that's translated as love, and Peter's using another word that's translated as love. And so you have Jesus asking Peter, do you love me? And the word that Jesus is using is the word that is most often used in the New Testament for love. And in this particular context, I think what Jesus is asking Peter is for a total commitment. Do you love me, that you will follow me wherever that takes you? Whatever the price is that you need to pay, will you make a radical change in your life to follow me wherever that call leads you? A very intense word that we have translated as love. Now, Peter, when he responds, he says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. But Peter's using a different word, which is a little less intense than the word Jesus is using. The word that Peter is using could be described as saying kind of like, well, I'm with you. Do you love me? Well, I'm with you. Do you love me? I'm with you. But then the third time, what is really striking about this story is that Jesus uses Peter's word. Peter, really? Are you really with me? And that's why Peter was hurt at the third question, because Jesus asked him the question using the word that he is using. Now, this doesn't come across in hardly any English translation of the New Testament, which I think is unfortunate. However, there's at least one translation called the New Testament of Modern English that was translated by J.B. Phillips. This translation is copyrighted in 1958. And Phillips differentiates between the two words, and I think he does an excellent job of translating this conversation. So I want to read it to you again, and I want to read it to you from Phillips' point of view. Listen to the difference here. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these others? Yes, Lord, he replied. You know that I'm your friend. Then feed my lambs, returned Jesus. Then he said for a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, returned Peter. You know that I'm your friend. Then take care of my sheep, replied Jesus. Then for the third time, Jesus spoke to him and said, Simon, son of John, are you my friend? Peter was deeply hurt because Jesus' third question to him was, are you my friend? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know I'm your friend. You see the difference? Do you love me? I'm your friend. Do you love me? Well, I'm your friend. Really, Peter? Are you really my friend? Oh, Lord, you know everything. You know I'm your friend. So what's going on here? Well, John doesn't tell us, but I do think this is where the two stories come together. What I think is happening here is that Peter recognizes that he was very, use the word arrogant, cocky, I don't know what word you might want to use, but he's hearkening back to when he boasted to Jesus, all these people may deny you, but I won't. But you can count on me. And he was so embarrassed, so broken, so guilty at his denial after that boast. I believe that it's made Peter kind of apprehensive. And so he's a little careful about what he says. So Jesus is asking him one thing, and Peter just can't say it. Peter, do you love me to make a total, radical commitment of your life? And Peter's thinking, wow, you know, if I boast again and if I mess up again, I will never get over it. So he can't say what Jesus wants him to say, but he says what he can say. Lord, I'm your friend. I'm with you. Really, Peter? Really? Really, I'm with you. So as I look at this story, what I see in this story is a beautiful story of Jesus' grace. Peter can't say what Jesus wants him to say, but yet Jesus accepts him anyway, just as he is. This past week, there was an announcement in the news that George Beverly Shea, the great baritone singer of the Billy Graham revivals, passed away. He's over 100 years old. And I used to watch Billy Graham as a young boy growing up. And every time Billy Graham would extend the invitation song was always the same. What was it? Just as I am. Just as I am. And what that great hymn is saying is, it's God's grace. You are received just as you are. And I think this story is showing that Jesus received Peter just where he was. But yet if you look at the life of Peter, Peter grew into being what Jesus asked. Because Peter didn't ever deny him again. Peter did make a radical change. He did live his life faithfully and even died as a martyr. The Bible doesn't tell us how he died, but church tradition tells us that Peter was crucified in Rome. And when he was condemned to die, he said to his executioners, I am not worthy to die as my Lord. And he requested to be crucified head downward. And that's how we believe Peter died. Jesus is calling him to face the very thing that he fears, which was death. That's why he denied Jesus. And yet he died for Jesus. Peter, do you love me? And Peter's life said yes. Now, what does this story mean to us? I think what it means to us is that all of us are Peter. We, as believers, are received by grace. We all have our human frailties. We've all made our mistakes. We all have various apprehensions about who we are, what we can do. And yet Jesus receives us just as we are. But as he receives us just as we are, he is always calling us to something better. And we are to grow in faith as Peter grew in faith and served faithfully. So I believe that the living Christ is speaking to us through this story. And what he's saying is, do you love me? Then come on and follow me, because I have something important for you to do. Will you pray with me?